MotoGP team in Rio is the places is probably a more open selection process than it's been for a long time. There aren't quite as many very obvious combinations available. And Rio will be different, I think. It's because climate and the way the competition has evolved.
After Diana's tragic death, renovation crews made a spine-chilling discovery at Kensington Palace. A sealed room, frozen in time since Diana's final days. Princess Anne was summoned to investigate, but what she found inside an ornate jewellery box left her absolutely shattered. The truth Diana died protecting is finally exposed, and it's more shocking than anyone imagined. What really happened that night in Paris?
The world is too little aware of the waste of life, limb, and land which anti-personnel landmines are causing amongst some of the poorest people on Earth.
When news of the discovery reached Buckingham Palace, officials knew they needed someone with discretion and authority to handle the situation. Princess Anne, known for her no-nonsense approach to royal duties and her ability to keep matters confidential, was the natural choice. As the Princess Royal and one of the hardest-working members of the family, Anne had spent decades managing sensitive situations with minimal drama. Her relationship with Diana had been complicated, marked by the kind of tensions that often exist between people with vastly different temperaments and approaches to royal life. In the early years, Anne had viewed her sister-in-law with a degree of skepticism. Diana's emotional openness and her ability to connect with crowds seemed foreign to Anne, who had been raised in a different era of royal protocol. Where Diana sought the cameras, Anne preferred to work quietly behind the scenes. But over time, particularly in private moments away from public scrutiny, Anne had come to recognize something deeper in Diana. She saw a woman fiercely devoted to her sons and genuinely committed to the causes she championed. There had been instances, brief and unspoken, when mutual respect had existed between them. Stepping into that forgotten room, Anne was struck by the stillness of it all. Dust particles floated in the afternoon light, streaming through covered windows. The space felt like a time capsule, preserving not just objects but the essence of a life that had been lived under constant observation. Anne moved methodically through the room, cataloguing items with the efficiency she brought to all her duties. But then something caught her eye. Partially hidden beneath a silk scarf on a back shelf sat a jewellery box, unlike anything else in the collection. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Made from dark rosewood and inlaid with delicate pearls and sapphires, it seemed to glow even under the layer of dust that covered it. The box was heavier than Anne expected when she picked it up, as if it held more than just precious stones and metal. She turned it slowly in her gloved hands, examining the intricate details with growing curiosity. Then she saw the inscription, etched subtly into the base of the lid, almost as if it was never meant for public viewing, were the words, "For those who dare seek truth, DS." The initials were unmistakable. Diana Spencer. Not the Princess of Wales, not her royal title, just her own name. Something about that choice felt deliberate, personal, even defiant. Anne stood there holding the box, her mind racing. What truth had Diana been referring to? Why hide such a cryptic message inside something so beautiful? Anne carefully opened the lid. Inside were some of the most stunning pieces of jewellery she had ever seen. There were earrings set with rare Burmese rubies that caught the light with an almost otherworldly glow. A sapphire bracelet lay coiled like a frozen stream of starlight. An emerald and diamond pendant cut with such precision that it seemed to radiate from within, rested on a bed of velvet. These were not ordinary pieces. Each one represented exceptional craftsmanship and significant value. But as Anne examined each item more closely, she noticed something odd. On the back of each piece were tiny markings, so small they were barely visible to the naked eye. She retrieved a magnifying glass from her bag and studied them carefully. Some of the markings looked like coordinates. Others resembled reference numbers or codes. One brooch bore what appeared to be an international bank code. These weren't just sentimental keepsakes or valuable heirlooms. They were something else entirely. They were clues. Anne's fingers moved instinctively across the surface of the box itself, tracing the grooves and examining the panels. Her years of experience with antique furniture and royal collections had taught her that master craftsmen often included hidden features in their work. Almost by chance, her thumb pressed against a slightly raised section near the base of the box. There was a soft, mechanical click. The bottom panel shifted ever so slightly. She paused, holding her breath. Carefully, she slid the panel open to reveal a second compartment beneath the first. It was shallow but tightly packed with items that had clearly been placed there with great care. A bundle of handwritten letters, their pages yellowed with age but still legible, were tied together with a pale blue ribbon. They smelled faintly of lavender, a scent Diana had been known to favour. Beneath the letters lay a collection of glossy photographs. Anne spread the photographs out on a nearby table. Diana appeared in each one, but she was clearly in disguise. Wearing sunglasses, scarves and simple clothing that bore no resemblance to her usual elegant style, she was meeting with people Anne didn't recognise. The locations were equally unfamiliar. Small cafes in what looked like European cities, underground parking garages with concrete walls and fluorescent lighting, private homes with unremarkable facades. None of these settings fit the public narrative of the Princess of Wales that the world had known. Tucked beneath the photographs was a small silver key. A tag attached to it bore a handwritten notation: Zurich, deposit box 837L. Anne stared at it, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. A Swiss bank deposit box. Why would Diana have needed such a thing? What could she have been hiding there? She turned her attention back to the letters. Her own name was written in Diana's distinctive looping script on the first envelope. The message was simple but chilling. To Anne, please read if I am gone. The date written in the corner made Anne's blood run cold. It was dated just 3 days before Diana's death in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris. With slightly trembling hands, Anne carefully unfolded the first letter. The ink had smudged in places, as though the words had been written in haste, perhaps with tears. Her eyes scanned the page and then stopped, fixed on the opening line. She read it again, unable to quite believe what she was seeing. Anne, if you're reading this, then they succeeded in silencing me. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Anne sat down slowly in a nearby chair, the letter still in her hands. This wasn't melodrama or the emotional outburst of someone under stress. This was a deliberate statement, carefully worded and intentionally hidden. Diana had anticipated something. She had prepared for a possibility that most people would have dismissed as paranoid fantasy. Anne looked around the room again, seeing it now with completely different eyes. Every item, every photograph, every carefully preserved possession took on new meaning. Diana hadn't just lived in this space. She had used it as a vault, a place to hide evidence and information that someone had clearly not wanted found. The jewellery box with its cryptic inscription, the marked pieces inside, the hidden compartment with letters and photographs, and a Swiss bank key, it all pointed to something far larger than a personal collection of memories. The truth Diana had mentioned in her inscription wasn't an abstract concept or a philosophical musing. It was real, documented, and dangerous enough that she had felt the need to hide it away like this. And now, more than a quarter century after her death, that truth had found its way into Anne's hands. The question that echoed in Anne's mind as she sat there, surrounded by the ghosts of her sister-in-law's final days, was simple but terrifying. What had Diana discovered, and who had been willing to kill to keep it hidden? Anne sat alone in her private quarters that evening, the jewellery box resting on a velvet cloth before her. The inscription continued to pull at her thoughts, refusing to let her settle into any sense of normalcy. For those who dare seek truth, DS. Those words carried a weight she hadn't fully appreciated until now. Anne had never been one for theatrics or emotional displays, but something about this discovery had shaken the foundation of what she thought she knew about Diana's final years. She opened the letter with steady hands, though her heart was beating faster than usual. Diana's handwriting filled the pages, elegant yet urgent, with letters slanting forward as if she had been racing against time itself. The tone started warmly, almost affectionate, but quickly shifted into something far more serious. Diana began by recounting a charity gala in 1995, describing it as the night she first realized something was deeply wrong. According to the letter, Diana had been working closely with a children's foundation that she had championed for years. The organization focused on providing medical care and educational resources to vulnerable children in conflict zones. But during a routine review of their overseas programs, Diana noticed that funds weren't reaching their intended destinations. When she quietly asked for clarification, she was met with vague responses and financial statements that didn't add up. The more she pressed, the more evasive the answers became. Eventually, she received what she described as veiled threats, suggestions that she should focus on other matters and leave the financial administration to the professionals. But Diana hadn't backed down. Anne turned the page to find a handwritten spreadsheet, meticulously copied in Diana's own hand. The numbers documented bank transfers, account numbers, and transaction dates. According to Diana's notes, money earmarked for landmine survivors in Bosnia, children's hospitals in Angola, and women's shelters across Eastern Europe had been systematically diverted. The funds were being funneled into private accounts belonging to individuals Diana had identified through her own investigation. Some of the names belonged to prominent businessmen with international connections. Others were more troubling. Diana had traced certain transactions to accounts linked with figures who had connections to the royal household itself. She didn't name them directly in this letter, perhaps out of caution or perhaps because she knew whoever found these documents would need to verify the information independently. But the implication was clear. The corruption she had uncovered wasn't limited to external actors. It reached into the very institutions that were supposed to represent integrity and public service. Diana's tone in the letter grew colder and more determined as she described what happened next. She had begun meeting secretly with investigative journalists, one based in France and another working out of Switzerland. These journalists had already been tracking similar patterns of financial irregularities connected to international charities. They compared notes with Diana, sharing information about offshore accounts, shell companies, and complex money laundering schemes that used humanitarian organizations as cover. The letter described late-night meetings in obscure locations. Diana mentioned using code names to communicate, setting up dead drops for document exchanges, and taking elaborate precautions to avoid surveillance. She had even started recording her conversations, storing the tapes in locations she didn't specify in the letter. Whistleblowers from within various organizations had begun reaching out to her, terrified for their safety, but desperate to expose what they knew. They provided documents, testimony, and evidence of a network that extended far beyond what Diana had initially imagined. Anne sat back in her chair, her mind reeling. She had never truly considered Diana capable of orchestrating something like this. For years, Anne had thought of her as impulsive, driven by emotion rather than strategy. Diana had been compassionate, certainly, and genuinely committed to her causes, but Anne had always assumed there was a degree of naivety in her approach. This letter revealed something entirely different. This was a woman conducting a careful, methodical investigation. She was documenting everything, building a case, and doing it all while maintaining her public duties and caring for 2 young sons. The letter's tone softened when Diana wrote about William and Harry. Anne could feel the shift in the writing, the way Diana's pen seemed to press more gently into the paper. "I'm not afraid to die," Diana had written, "but I'm afraid for them. I'm afraid of what they will be forced to inherit if this truth is buried with me. I want them to grow up in a world where they can trust the institutions that claim to serve the public good. Right now, I cannot promise them that world, but I can try to create it, even if it costs me everything." Anne felt an unexpected sting of tears. She blinked them away, surprised by her own reaction. She had misjudged Diana so completely. The final months of Diana's life, which had been portrayed in the press as a time of romantic drama and scandal, had actually been defined by something far more significant. Diana had been on a mission, driven not by a desire for attention or revenge, but by a genuine need to protect her children from the corrupt forces operating within and around the monarchy. As Anne reached the final page of the letter, her fingers froze over a single sentence that Diana had underlined 3 times. "If you find this, Anne, then know I left behind a final insurance policy. Everything is hidden in a Swiss bank vault, protected until someone brave enough comes looking for the truth." Anne looked at the small silver key lying on the table beside her. The tag read, "Zurich, Deposit Box 837L. Suddenly, the weight of that small piece of metal seemed enormous. This wasn't just a key to a safe deposit box. It was a key to evidence that Diana had risked everything to gather. evidence that someone had clearly wanted to destroy along with her. Within days, Anne had made the necessary arrangements. She travelled to Zurich under the tightest security she could manage, using a private jet and maintaining absolute discretion about her destination. Even her closest staff members were given misleading information about her itinerary. Only her most trusted security detail knew her actual location, and they had been carefully vetted. The Swiss bank was everything one would expect from an institution built on centuries of discretion. The building itself was unremarkable from the outside, designed to blend into the surrounding architecture rather than draw attention. Inside, the atmosphere was one of hushed efficiency. Anne presented the key and the tag bearing the box number to a clerk whose expression revealed nothing. He glanced at her identification, nodded without any sign of recognition, and led her through multiple layers of security. Each checkpoint was more sterile and silent than the last. The viewing room was small and private, lit by soft overhead lights that cast no shadows. When the deposit box was placed on the table before her, Anne hesitated for just a moment. Once she opened this, there would be no going back. Whatever Diana had hidden here would become her responsibility, her burden, and potentially her danger. She lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of documents, organized with the same meticulous care Diana had shown in her letters. There were ledgers recording financial transactions, receipts for payments that should never have been made, records of transfers between accounts in multiple countries. Everything was color-coded and labeled in Diana's unmistakable handwriting. Folders were marked with names, dates, and brief descriptions of their contents. But what caught Anne's attention most were the tapes and digital discs stacked neatly at the bottom of the box. Each one was labeled with a date and subject. Some bore titles like Meeting with Source B, Geneva, or Financial Records, Angola Project. One disc, sitting separate from the others, had a label that made Anne's breath catch in her throat. It simply read, "If I disappear." With trembling hands, Anne inserted the disc into the player provided in the viewing room. The screen flickered to life, and there she was. Diana, sitting in what appeared to be a modest private apartment, her face bare of makeup, her eyes tired but intensely focused. She looked directly into the camera and began to speak in a clear, steady voice. "If you are watching this, then I have been silenced. But I want you to know what I found and why I could not walk away from it." For the next 40 minutes, Anne watched as Diana methodically laid out the entire network she had uncovered. She named names, not just faceless businessmen and foreign investors, but members of the British aristocracy, men who smiled in official photographs and hosted elegant charity balls. Diana described how they had used charitable organisations as financial fronts, creating a system that allowed them to divert millions of pounds. The money funded arms deals in conflict zones, flowed into offshore accounts, and supported operations that Diana could only describe as criminal. Diana explained that she had tried to alert the proper authorities. Some had listened with concern, but advised her to be careful. Others had warned her directly to stop asking questions. She described growing paranoid about her own safety, noticing cars that seemed to follow her, feeling watched even in supposedly secure locations. She mentioned that she had begun to suspect her car had been tampered with, that she no longer fully trusted even her security for detail, and that she had started using back entrances and coding her phone conversations. When Diana spoke about William and Harry, her eyes filled with tears, though her voice remained strong. "I must leave them something more than fairy tales," she whispered to the camera. "They need to know the truth about the world they're inheriting. They need to know that their mother tried to make it better, even when powerful people wanted her to stay silent." The video ended and Anne sat in the silence of the viewing room, her mind struggling to process everything she had just witnessed. Diana hadn't been paranoid or emotionally unstable, as some had suggested in the years following her death. She had been right. She had uncovered a genuine conspiracy, documented it carefully, and preserved the evidence, knowing that her life might be at risk. Anne began gathering the documents, preparing to leave with the evidence secured. As she stood to go, the bank clerk who had been waiting outside the room stepped forward. His expression was professional, but there was something in his eyes that made Anne pause. "Madam," he said quietly, "you should know that you're not the first person to inquire about this box." Anne's hand tightened around the key. "What do you mean?" 2 weeks ago, he continued, keeping his voice low, someone else came asking about deposit box 837L. They claimed to be family. We denied access because they couldn't provide the key or proper authorization, but they were very insistent. The implications hit Anne like a physical blow. Someone else knew about this evidence. Someone had been searching for it. And if they had come looking 2 weeks ago, that meant they had learned about the box's existence somehow. Perhaps they had been monitoring Anne from the moment she discovered Diana's hidden room. The race to control Diana's truth had already begun, and Anne had just stepped into the middle of it. Anne returned to London wrapped in a cloak of quiet determination. The flight back had given her time to think, to process what she had seen in that Swiss bank vault, and to begin understanding the enormity of what Diana had been facing in her final months. The evidence was now secured in a private vault far from any royal property, a location known only to Anne and 2 trusted individuals who had helped her arrange the transfer. But even as she took these precautions, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was already being watched. The first signs were subtle, easy to dismiss as coincidence or technical malfunction. Her personal mobile phone, the one she used exclusively for family communications, began making strange clicking sounds during calls. Conversations would sometimes echo back at her, creating an unsettling delay that hadn't existed before. Then her mail started arriving in suspicious condition. Letters that should have been sealed appeared to have been opened and carefully resealed. Official documents arrived days late, and when they did, the envelopes showed signs of tampering. One morning, Anne's car, which was always meticulously maintained by palace staff, simply refused to start in her private garage. The engine turned over but wouldn't engage. When mechanics were finally called to examine it, they discovered a severed brake line. The damage was dismissed as rodent activity, an explanation that might have satisfied someone less suspicious. But Anne knew better. She had seen Diana's warnings about tampered vehicles. The coincidence was too precise to ignore. Anne contacted an old friend, someone who had retired from British intelligence years ago, but still maintained connections and expertise in security matters. He arrived discreetly and spent an entire day sweeping her residence and checking her devices. What he found confirmed her worst fears. There was tracking malware installed on her phone, sophisticated enough that it would have required professional expertise to place it there. Hidden listening devices had been planted in her study, tiny microphones so small they were nearly invisible, even when you knew where to look. Someone had been monitoring her communications, tracking her movements, and listening to her private conversations. The question of who was behind the surveillance remained unanswered, but the message was clear. Someone knew she had Diana's evidence, and they were watching to see what she would do with it. Anne began taking extreme precautions, changing her routines, using different phones for different purposes, and conducting sensitive conversations only in secure locations that were swept immediately before each meeting. It was during this period of heightened tension that Anne received an unmarked package. There was no return address, no indication of who had sent it or how it had been delivered. Inside was a single piece of paper with just one name written on it in careful block letters: Timothy Radcliffe. Anne recognized the name immediately. He had been Diana's private secretary, a quiet man known for his fierce loyalty and discretion. After Diana's death, he had vanished from public life entirely, refusing interviews and shunning any connection to the media circus that had surrounded the tragedy. Anne's investigative instincts kicked in. She used her intelligence contacts to track Timothy down, eventually locating him in a modest home outside Bath. When she reached out through secure channels, he agreed to meet, but only under very specific conditions. The meeting would take place at night in a small chapel on the outskirts of town, a location known only to a handful of local residents. Anne arrived after dark, accompanied only by her most trusted security officer who waited outside. The chapel was old, its stone walls thick, and its interior lit only by flickering candles. Timothy was already there, standing near the altar. The years had lined his face deeply, but his eyes were sharp and alert. He wasted no time on pleasantries. Your sister-in-law was not working. Alone, he began without preamble. She trusted a very small group of us, people who had no stake in protecting the machine, people who believed that truth mattered more than institutional preservation. We've been keeping watch all these years, waiting for someone with the courage to pick up where she left off. Anne listened in silence as Timothy laid out what he knew. The official investigation into Diana's death had been fundamentally flawed from the beginning. Critical evidence had been overlooked or dismissed. Witnesses who reported seeing suspicious vehicles in the tunnel that night had been ignored or their statements downplayed. CCTV footage from key locations along the route had mysteriously gone missing. The famous white Fiat Uno that multiple witnesses reported seeing at the scene was never properly investigated, despite clear evidence that it had been in contact with Diana's vehicle. Timothy explained that he had maintained contact with several of the journalists Diana had been working with before her death. One of them, the investigative reporter from France, had been pursuing leads about the crash when he died suddenly in what was ruled an accidental overdose. The Swiss journalist had received death threats and eventually fled the country, abandoning his investigation entirely. The whistleblowers who had come forward to Diana had all retreated back into silence, too frightened to continue speaking out. It was never meant to be solved, Timothy said, his voice heavy with years of suppressed anger and grief. The investigation was designed to look thorough, while actually ensuring that nothing of substance would ever be uncovered. Key questions were never asked. Obvious leads were never followed. The whole thing was quietly closed and filed away, just as someone very powerful had intended. The weight of this revelation pressed down on Anne's shoulders. She had suspected something was wrong, but hearing it laid out so clearly, with such specific detail, made it impossible to deny. Diana had been pursuing dangerous people, exposing crimes that reached into the highest levels of power. And when she had gotten too close to the truth, she had been eliminated. Not by accident, not by a drunk driver and aggressive paparazzi, but through a carefully orchestrated operation designed to look like a tragic mishap. Anne returned home late that night, her mind churning with everything Timothy had told her. She parked in her private garage and made her way to her residence, checking over her shoulder despite the security presence. When she reached her door, she noticed something that made her freeze. A white envelope lay on the floor just inside the entrance, as if someone had slid it under the door while she was away. She picked it up carefully, noting that there was no postage, no address, nothing to indicate where it had come from. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message written in neat, anonymous typeface. The words were brief and absolutely clear in their intent. Stop digging or join her. Anne stood there in the dim light of her hallway, the threatening note trembling slightly in her hand. The message couldn't have been more explicit. Someone was watching her investigation closely enough to know exactly what she was doing. They knew she had been to Switzerland, that she had met with Timothy Radcliffe, that she was following Diana's trail, and they were warning her that if she continued, she would face the same fate. For a long moment, Anne simply stood there, processing the threat. She thought about Diana, about the courage it must have taken to pursue this investigation, knowing the dangers involved. She thought about William and Harry, who had grown up without their mother because someone had decided that institutional secrecy was more valuable than a human life. She thought about all the victims of the financial crimes Diana had uncovered, the children who never received the medical care that had been promised, the families who had been robbed by people claiming to help them. Fear was a natural response to such a direct threat. Anne felt it, a cold tightness in her chest, a heightened awareness of every shadow and sound. But fear had never been the dominant force in her life. She had spent decades fulfilling her royal duties with discipline and dedication, often in challenging circumstances. She had faced hostile crowds, dangerous situations, and even a kidnapping attempt in her younger years. Fear was something she acknowledged, but did not allow to control her decisions. What the anonymous threat writer had failed to understand was that Anne had reached a point of no return. She had read Diana's letters, seen her video testimony, and held the evidence of crimes that had been covered up for decades. She had learned the truth about Diana's death, not through conspiracy theories or speculation, but through carefully documented facts. The ghost of her sister-in-law was no longer a distant memory, coloured by complicated feelings and old tensions. Diana had become real to her in a way she never had been in life, a woman of courage and conviction who had died trying to protect her children and expose corruption. Anne placed the threatening note carefully in a secure folder with the rest of the evidence. She would not be intimidated into silence. Diana had fought alone, isolated by the very institution she had married into, dismissed and undermined at every turn. But Anne was not alone. She had resources, connections, and a position within the establishment that made her harder to silence. More importantly, she now understood what was at stake. This wasn't just about vindicating Diana's memory or satisfying her own curiosity. It was about preventing the same corrupt network from continuing to operate, and more urgently, about protecting William and Harry and their children from the same forces that had killed their mother. The next morning, Anne made a series of carefully encrypted phone calls. She contacted the retired MI5 director who had helped her secure Diana's evidence. She reached out to trusted allies within the government who owed no loyalty to the individuals Diana had implicated in her investigation. She began building a network of her own, people who could help her not just investigate, but also protect the members of Diana's family who might now be at risk. Because if there was one thing the threatening note had made absolutely clear, it was that the danger had never really ended. It had simply been dormant, waiting in the shadows. And now that Anne had begun to shine light into those shadows, the predators were emerging once again. This time they wouldn't just be targeting one isolated princess. They would be going after anyone who threatened to expose what they had worked so hard to hide. Anne understood this, and unlike Diana, who had faced this threat largely alone, Anne was determined to be ready for whatever came next. The threat against Diana's family materialized faster than Anne had anticipated. Within 48 hours of receiving the anonymous warning, her worst fears became reality. A call came through on a secure line from Timothy Radcliffe, his voice strained and urgent in a way that immediately set Anne on high alert. There had been an incident at Lambrook School where Prince George was attending classes. An unauthorized individual had attempted to breach the security perimeter, claiming to be conducting routine maintenance work. The person had been stopped by alert security staff, but the timing and nature of the attempted infiltration raised immediate red flags. Anne's blood ran cold. The same pattern Diana had documented in her final months was repeating itself, but now the targets were the next generation. She immediately activated the emergency protocols she had quietly put in place. A covert protection team, composed of former intelligence operatives she trusted absolutely, was dispatched to monitor all of William's children. Another team was assigned to track Prince Harry's movements and his family's security in the United States. Anne knew they were operating on borrowed time now. The network Diana had exposed was clearly willing to target children to protect their secrets. Anne moved quickly, traveling undercover to confront the people she now knew were complicit in the conspiracy. She had spent weeks cross-referencing Diana's evidence with current financial records and personnel files, building an undeniable case against specific individuals. Some of those names belonged to people she had known for decades, individuals who attended state functions and presented themselves as pillars of the establishment. The betrayal cut deep, but Anne's focus remained razor-sharp. In a private meeting room at Clarence House, Anne confronted two senior members of the royal household whose names appeared repeatedly in Diana's documentation. Their faces remained carefully composed, masks of polished civility. That revealed nothing. Anne placed a thick folder on the table between them, her voice colder than they had ever heard it. "You knew what she was uncovering," Anne said, each word measured and deliberate, "and you allowed it to happen." One of them shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his first crack in composure. These were complex matters, far beyond what one person could fully comprehend. The princess had good intentions, but lacked the broader perspective necessary to understand the delicate balance of international relations and financial arrangements. "No," Anne interrupted, her voice cutting through his justification like a blade. "They were crimes, financial fraud on a massive scale, using charitable organizations as cover, and now your silence is no longer enough protection. If anything happens to William, to Harry, or to any of their children, every page of this evidence goes public. Every name, every transaction, every piece of documentation Diana collected." The silence that followed was suffocating. The two men exchanged glances, communicating something unspoken. Finally, one of them spoke, his voice low and carrying an unmistakable edge of threat. "You're making enemies you cannot even see, Anne. Forces that operate beyond the reach of family loyalty or public opinion." Anne met his gaze without flinching. "I already have those enemies, and I am still standing." But the network was not finished making its point. Within days, the situation escalated dramatically. MI5 teams monitoring William's estate reported suspicious activity. An unmarked delivery van had attempted to bypass perimeter security using forged credentials. When it was intercepted, the contents were deeply alarming. The van contained detailed blueprints of the estate, surveillance photographs showing the daily routines of household staff, and most chillingly, replacement brake components for a vehicle registered to William's household. The parallels to Diana's own fears about vehicle tampering were impossible to ignore. The final warning came just hours later. A black SUV carrying Catherine, Prince George and Princess Charlotte was forced off a narrow country road by another vehicle that appeared seemingly from nowhere. The palace driver, highly trained in defensive driving techniques, managed to maintain enough control to prevent the vehicle from rolling, but the car was totaled. Emergency services arrived within minutes, and miraculously, no one suffered serious injuries. Catherine and the children were shaken, but physically unharmed. But Anne knew exactly what this was. Not an accident. Not a random incident of road rage. It was a message, delivered with brutal clarity. The network was showing her that they could reach Diana's grandchildren whenever they chose. Next time, they wouldn't simply force a car off the road. Next time, they would finish what they had started 27 years ago in a Paris tunnel. Anne stood in a secure operations room, watching footage of the wreckage being cleared from the roadside. Her face was set in hard lines, her jaw clenched with determination. She had reached the point Diana must have reached in those final weeks, the moment when retreat was no longer possible, and the only path forward was straight through the danger. The network had made their move, shown their hand, and demonstrated that they were willing to harm children to protect their secrets. But in doing so, they had also made a critical mistake. They had given Anne the final piece of evidence she needed, proof that the conspiracy Diana had uncovered was still active, still dangerous, and still operating with impunity. The attempted attack on Catherine and the children would be impossible to dismiss as coincidence or accident. Combined with everything else Diana had documented, it formed an undeniable pattern of criminal conspiracy reaching the highest levels of power. Anne made her decision. The evidence could no longer be held in reserve, used as leverage or protection. It needed to be released, made public in a way that would be impossible to suppress or ignore. Diana had died trying to expose this truth. Anne would not make the same mistake of trying to work within a system that was itself corrupted. The truth would be released completely and without compromise, regardless of the consequences.